Howdy folks, welcome back to Bagel Dog DIY. I'm your host Ben. In today's video we're working on part 2 of the laundry room. We're going to start trimming out, doing the casing around this windows and around the doors, getting everything ready for the wainscoting that's going to be going in. As you can see, we got the shelves roughed in the first part of the video, the built-in shelves over the washer and dryer there, and that upper shelf. Today we're just moving right along with the project. I'm going to start by ripping out this old casing around this window and the old casing around the door. Now, one of the reasons we decided to change the casing in this house is, first of all, we just don't really like it. It's kind of a late 90s, early 2000s style. We're going to go with something much wider, a little more craftsman-y, try to give the home some character, even though it is a newer home. And also, the sheetrock in this house was just done really, really poorly. Underneath a lot of these windows, even with the casing on there, you can actually see gaps in the sheetrock. So going something much wider will cover that. Luckily, they were all insulated well, and they were all flashed and installed properly. There's no air leaks or cold spots in the house or anything like that. But yeah, the casing just doesn't really work for us. So the first thing I do is get the casing ripped off the window here, and then I get the casing ripped off the door. So here you see me coming back from the hardware store with a bunch of wood. This is 1x6, 1x8, 5/4 by 6, and 5/4 by 8. If you don't know what 5/4 is, it's how you'd measure lumber, not from like a big box store, from like an actual lumber store. Each quarter denotes an actual quarter of an inch. So 5/4 is 1.25 inches, 6/4 is 1.5 inches, 8/4 is 2 inches, 2/4 is 1/2 inch, and so on and so forth. So that's just a little bit of knowledge for you. I was always taught when doing trim, there's a million different styles, of course, but that you should never dead end trim into something that's thinner. It should always be a board that's thicker. So I use thicker boards on my top and bottom casing. The top casing over the door, the top and bottom casing on the window are thicker. They're 5/4 boards. So the first thing I do when I'm doing a window casing is I set my upper and lower, and I make sure they're perfectly level. I get them cut, I get them nailed up, and then I can measure my pieces and my horizontal pieces to go in between them. Or my vertical pieces, rather, to go in between them. So that's what I'm doing here, just getting my vertical pieces measured, getting them cut out. Of course, there's going to be a couple trips back and forth to the saw. A better way maybe to do this, if I had been thinking at the time or had my wood in there, is you can just hold it up there and mark it off the board. That's going to be more accurate every time. There's no measuring. And just physically marking a piece like that's just always going to be more accurate. But in this case, I cut it a couple times, I take it in, I trim it again, and I bring it back out, and then I get it nailed in place. Beyond that, I do end up ripping down the trim on the left-hand side of the door, or the casing on the left-hand side of the door, because that's such a narrow gap. I also rip down or end up using a jigsaw to cut out for the switch and cover plate. That is going to get an extension anytime you cut like that and add a thick piece of trim. You can't just like put your faceplate back on. That is not to code, that electrical box. But they do make inserts. They make these plastic extensions that extend your electrical box in the wall. So I'll be putting one of those in. I'll show you how that works in another video. I end up doing it in the garage as well. I'm going to cut in a video here that actually shows me trimming the garage door. From the garage side of the garage door, just because it's a more normal door like you would trim. This laundry room one has a lot of cuts and I have to rip down the one side. So it's not really standard. It's also kind of in an awkward place because the dryer's right up against it, so it's a little bit difficult to film. So I'm going to cut to a time lapse of just how I would trim just your standard everyday door. Alright, now here's a little fast motion video. So this is just a better angle. This is actually the door going into the house from the garage. Pulling off the old trim. I'm working currently right now, actually. I'm finishing the taping and sheetrocking and everything in here. The whole place is a mess. There's dust and sheetrock mud and everything everywhere. That'll be coming out in a future video, the finishing of this garage that never got finished. But in the meantime, I was just so sick of looking at this horrible trim. I walk in and out of the store all the time, going to the saw and everything, and I just thought this was a good way to show you guys on a door exactly how I would do casing around a door. So I do my header first. You saw me there in the beginning. I have a little piece of scrap 1x6. I hold that up to the door with my level on it, and I put some lines outside that actually make my marks of where my header is going to end up. So that way it's just easy to put up there, a little pencil mark on the wall, and then you can just hold it up there, put a level on it, and send your nails through. So that's a 5/4 by 6 that's going up top there for the head casing, whatever we want to call it, upper casing. I'm real bad at these terms. Apparently all molding around doors and windows is just called casing. I like the back window right now. You can see out into the backyard. It looks like a fuzzy TV screen. It's snowing, of course. Yay. a little bit of winter weather. So the first thing I do is I get that upper casing on, I get it level, I get it nailed in, and then these are the blocks I was talking about, these lower blocks. So that 8-inch 5/4 that I ended up not using for casing around the windows, I saved. No wood is wasted, and I'm using these for these blocks down on the floor that my trim will end into my floor molding and my vertical casing coming down the doors, and that just follows that theory again. I was always taught that trim should never dead end into something that's not thicker than itself, so that's why the upper casing is thicker and the bottom casing, those door blocks, are thicker. So the vertical trim going on the left and right side of the door will end into something thicker. And then again, that's just something I was taught. Everybody has their own stylistic, how they do trim, whatever. Um, but that's just what I was taught. See me moving the railing. I am going to be redoing these steps, of course, and actually doing a nice railing and all that as I finish the shop. All this is changing. That weird hook 2x4 that's back there. The bikes aren't on the ceiling anymore. Yeah, but so then I cut my two side pieces, I put a level on those, and same thing, I just nail them right in. I'm using a 16 gauge nailer right here, going right into the 2x4 there that the door is screwed into, and right into the door casing. I have to cut a notch in here for the switches. You do, again, anytime you extend a switch plate like this, extend a box, so to speak, you have to actually put a box extension in there to make it stay to code. They make these little plastic spacers. They come in like 1/4 inch stacks, or you can buy them in 1/2 inch stacks or whatever, but they just screw in. They're real easy to put on. I'll do a real short video just showing that, because it seems to be something I keep running into. I guess I keep doing wide trim, so I'm going to keep running into it. But no big deal. You just mark it, cut it out with a jigsaw. I'm pretty sure I leave this exposed for right now because I didn't have my spacers. Don't do that. Do as I say, not as I do. You leave things exposed like that. I don't have any kids or anything. It's just my wife and I, my fiance and I. So I just warn her, don't stick your hand in the light switches. But don't do that. That's not good practice. You should have everything to finish the job. So then I cut a little block for the right-hand side here, just so I can balance out, that switch plate. It's a double switch because it's a switch for the kitchen and the lights for the garage. So I cut a little notch out of the piece right there, nail that on. Luckily there is a 2x4 right there. It's like right by the seam of the sheetrock. And then I decided that I'm going to make a little block for the garage door opener too. Why not? I spent all this time making it pretty. So I moved that over and I put it on a little block as well. So that's how I trim out a door. Again, it's pretty simple. Don't be intimidated by it. You start with your top casing, your bottom casing if there's going to be one, and then you just do your left and right. Make sure everything's level, and it'll all be good to go. All right, now back to the laundry room. And like I said, this trim that we're doing in here, this casing, is an experiment. Here's where I kind of realized that the 8-inch width above the door and the window is just too wide. It kind of puts the window trim anyway too close to the ceiling, especially if I'm going to do it through the rest of the house. Also, that this baseboard trim that I use that's 1x6, I think is too narrow. So I end up ripping this out. I rip out the baseboard and I rip out the header and footer casing and the header over the door. I end up going narrower on those and wider on the floor trim. So here I am just ripping everything out. None of this gets wasted. All this wood gets reused, trimming the rest of the house. I end up using those 8/4 as you just saw in that fast video, or the 8-inch 5/4 to be the blocks for the floor, where the floor trim, floor molding will end into. So yeah, just get this stuff ripped out and cut a new header and footer casing for the window and cut a new header casing for the door. Simple as that. I also learned a little bit here. When I started this project, my thinking was, oh, it's such a small space. I'll just paint everything in there. It's not that big of a room, no big deal. I do prime these boards starting at this point on before I put them in. If I had to do this room over again, I would fully paint everything, even the shelves, the plywood shelves. I'd paint everything. I would dry fit it and paint everything before I put it in this room. I ended up spending about 4 days in this room cutting in various different cutting in the shelves, cutting in the floor trim. It was big pain in the butt. I was glad that I primed the rest of everything from here on in, but I should have just painted all these boards before I put them in place. So live and learn. It was real awkward. I'm a big guy. It was awkward for me to work in this tiny space, cutting in paint behind the washer and dryer and things like that. But I didn't cut any corners. I did actually cut in the trim and trim behind the washer and dryer. Why not? So here you see me using this giant hole saw. This is actually to cut out the holes where the dryer vent goes to the outside. In the previous video, I actually show rerouting the dryer vent. It was routed into the garage. That's not to code. It needs to be routed outside. So I installed a new dryer vent. So I had this giant hole saw from, well, installing the dryer vent, and turns out it's exactly the right size, right? So I marked these trim boards in place, and I cut this out with the hole saw. This is a floor molding. And then I cut these edges with a jigsaw so it can slide right over that piece of tubing. No big deal. You'll also see me coming up routering one edge of the back of this trim board. That's the rabbet for the wainscoting to slide down into. There's going to be 1/4 inch thick wainscoting on the wall. So I router the back side of this so that the wainscoting can slide into there. You'll also notice on this board there's a huge knot in it. On this back side. That's going to go up against the wall, so it doesn't matter. What was more important to me, this is just grade 2 pine, was that it was straight. So this is all paint grade, and again, that's going up against the wall, so you won't see it. As long as it's good on one side, paintable anyway, and straight is more what I was concerned with. So you can actually get away with some pretty ugly lumber. You do have to spend your time picking through everything when you're at the hardware store, especially if it's a big box store. But just know what you're looking for. Know that you need one side of the board to be good or two sides of the board to be good, and take your time. Jigsaw to the rescue. And now here you see me with this handheld router, just cutting the rabbet in here. This handheld router is actually a new tool to me. My buddy Chip lent me his for some boxes I was making for a set about a year ago, and I was just using just a flush trim bit on it just to trim some carcasses I was making, some box carcasses. And the thing works amazing, super powerful. I immediately went out and bought one. It's been a great tool to have in the shop. And yeah, for stuff like this, like I said, just cutting this little rabbet so that we have a slot on the back of these baseboards for that wainscoting to slide into. Perfect tool for the job. Always do a test cut first, of course. See, there's tons of scrap lying around from cutting these boards. Made sure my router was adjusted properly, wasn't going to cut too deep, and we're good to go. So yeah, if you don't know what a rabbet is, it's just a groove. It's nothing. It's a fancy wood term for a square groove on the edge of a board. And here you see me getting smart and priming these boards up before I put them in, finally. Alright folks, that's going to kind of wrap up today's video. Floor molding, casing, window casing, door casing. Cut your top and bottoms first, do your verticals, make sure things are level. Don't be intimidated, it's pretty straightforward, you're just cutting boards. The only thing different about prepping for wainscoting, like I'm going to do in this room, is the groove I cut in the back of those floor molding boards for that wainscoting to slide into. Stay tuned in the next video, we're going to actually get the wainscoting installed. This video was just prep for that, getting all the casing done, and we're going to get this room painted. Then all we'll have left is the tile around the sink, and we will call it done. Cheers, folks. Have a great week.